Some generations of cars have been on the market for over a decade. Most generations of cars last around, 4 to 5 years before there's a redesign. Some cars had a single generation but lasted many years. Then there's models and generations that lasted only 1 to 2 years. I'm going to go in chronological order when showcasing each car, beginning in the 60s and ending in the 2000s. There are timestamps in the description if you'd like to skip over certain decades. With that said, here are some American cars with the shortest production runs. If you've been watching me for any length of time, you would know I don't cover cars from the 60s. It's not that I don't like them, I just know nothing about them, so bear with me here. Our first entry goes to the 4th generation Plymouth Belvedere. These were in production from 1960 to 1961, so just 2 model years. I don't know where these stacked up back in the day, if they were the affordable option, if they were the biggest in the lineup, I'm not entirely sure. While looking through sales brochures, I noticed a drastic change from the 60 and 61 model. They went finless. I believe that this trend was starting to phase out by around this time, but again, no idea. It appears in 1961 the Plymouths underwent some serious changes, and the public did not like them. I had a feeling that the awkward looking Dart came from around this time, and it sure did. I think the 61s look alright, but I definitely understand why these weren't likable. Fast forward a few years to 1968 with the Mercury Comet. These two only lasted 2 model years, but so did the prior 2 generations, and so I just picked the 4th generation because, in my opinion, they look the best. This is another model that I've never come across, not out at a car show, not while researching, not on YouTube, never. Quick edit here, after I found out about this car, I looked it up on YouTube and came across a wild video.
Hold on! Hold on! I have nowhere to go.
5 different engines were offered, from a 250 Thrift Power 6 up to a 428 V8. The Cyclone Cobra Jet came standard with the 428, and holy crap, those things are very impressive. The only Mercury from my time that packed some sort of a punch is the Marauder. There's also the final generation Cougar, but well, those are controversial. Out of the 60s and into the 70s with the GMC Sprint. These were only offered from 1971 to 1972. Addressing the elephant in the room, it's the GMC version of the El Camino. With rebadged variants, there's usually a different grille, different headlights, maybe taillights. These GMCs were practically identical. The only difference from the outside was the badges, or emblems. I couldn't find any info on the 72 models, but for 1971, a little over 5,500 units sold. That same year, over 41,000 El Caminos sold. GMC Sprints offered the exact same engines as the Camino, a 6-cylinder 307, 350, 402, and 454. Those 454s were only offered with the SP package, equivalent to the SS. For 1971, only 249 SPs were built, and it's estimated that only 25 had the 454. The next entry goes to the AMC Ambassador. It's always nice when I get to feature AMC. They made some of my favorite cars of all time. The first ran from 58 to 59. The second ran from 60 to 61. The third was just 62. The fourth ran from 63 to 64. The fifth from 65 to 66. The seventh was the longest with 5 model years. And lastly, the eighth, which was only offered for 1974. At least during the early 70s, the Ambassador was the top dog for AMC in terms of luxury and size. The Brougham trim was competitive compared to Oldsmobile and Mercury. In terms of looks, these things look amazing. Unfortunately, 1974 would mark the end of AMC's involvement in the big car market. Of the 500,000 plus AMCs sold in 1974, not even 25,000 were Ambassadors. The wagons look nice too, but those sedans with those awesome wheel covers, that sharp front end, the massive size, it's a crying shame how rare and hard these are to find on the road. I understand that the oil crisis was going on and things needed to shrink, but there still was a market for bigger size sedans, and I don't understand why these were so looked upon. Were they unreliable? Did they get the worst fuel economy out of the competition? Were they the most expensive? I really don't get it, because I think these cars were a really nice option back in the day. Staying in 1974, we have the 6th generation Plymouth Fury. These two were only offered for 1974 and were the last Furies on the C platform. Just like the Ambassador, this was the full-size sedan in its lineup. The reason for such a short run is because of what was going on at the time. It's the same story with the Ambassador. I will say though, Chrysler held on to their full-size sedans longer than anyone else did. Speaking of Chrysler, they offered some of the best exterior colors for their cars. There was just so much variety, and that is something that we definitely do not see today. In the same brochure is this red Fury pulling a camper. There's even a weight to engine chart beside it. What other sedans from the 80s on could potentially pull up to 7,000 pounds? I can't think of any at the moment. I'm sure there are maybe a few, but not many. Yet again, another Mopar with the 4th generation Dodge Monaco. These were only produced from 1977 until 1978. The last gen was on the C body. These have moved to the B body as a way to downsize. So I just talked about the Fury. The next gen Furies were introduced in 75. The corporate twin, which was the Monaco, was introduced in 77, 2 years later. Then they both entered production shortly after. Why would they introduce a corporate twin a few years later? I mean, it's been done before, it's just not common. Well, it's because the Coronet was renamed the Monaco in 77. So there was a twin the entire time. I could have redone this entry and act like I know what I'm talking about, but it's okay not to know everything. Anyway, these were police cars, taxis, luxury 2-door hardtops, station wagons, luxury sedans, affordable sedans. They did it all. When I say E-Class, what company comes to mind? Mercedes, right? Well, apparently for 1983 and 84 only, Chrysler had their own E-Class. The goal for these was to target buyers who wanted Chrysler luxury at a more affordable price. So they stacked these below the New Yorker and above the 600. For a modern perspective, it's like the Concorde and LHS. Both are relatively nice, but one's more high-end than the other. Some E-Class models received Chrysler's 2.2K turbo. No, they were not fast, not in the slightest, but it's still turbocharged, and not many people know that. Unfortunately for Chrysler, these didn't sell all that well. Sales of the New Yorker were nearly double that of the E-Class. With that out of the way, that concludes entries from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. If I decide to make a part 2, please feel free to drop any suggestions for the future. A lot of you guys know more than I do, and it's probably a lot easier to come up with entries than I can. First generation Cadillac Escalade. These were only offered from 1999 until 2000. This body style was introduced back in 92, and GM decided during its final year to create the Escalade. Here's why. The Navigator came out a year before, and it was a hit. The 5.9 Limited too was very luxurious. They came out that same year. So GM went to this old body style, which mind you was redesigned not even a year later, added some chrome and leather to it, and created the Escalade. It's exactly what Ford did with the Navigator, so it's totally understandable. I've always loved this generation of Suburban, Tahoe, and Yukon. The first gen Escalade is no exception. I do like the look of them. However, back in the day, these started at around $85,000. It's like buying a new Escalade in 2024. I would never. I'll also never be able to afford one either. I can't remember the last time I've seen one. They are super rare, and I'm sure nice, low-mile examples are holding their value quite well. 2 years later, Lincoln came out with the Blackwood. This has to be one of Lincoln's biggest modern disasters. They thought they would sell around 18,000 units per year. That did not happen. Not even close. For just 2002, they sold less than 3,500 units and the name was dropped. I saw one of these things maybe about a year ago and I almost crashed because I couldn't stop looking at it. In all honesty, I'll probably never see one again, so I had to make it count. I could spend the next 10-15 minutes talking about these. They really do fascinate me. But in the past few years, they've resurfaced, gaining more and more attention from other content creators, and so I'll revisit the Blackwood in a few years. Our final entry is the Mercury Sable, which was only offered from 2008 until 2009. What do you guys think of these, man, along with the Taurus? You really don't see much of them anymore. The Taurus only lasted 2 model years as well. Basically, it was a refresh for the 500, and the Sable was a refresh of the Montego. Under the hood of the Sable is Ford's 3.5-liter Cyclone V6, their latest dual overhead cam V6 engine. 263 horsepower and 265 pound-feet of torque. Pretty respectable numbers even for today. While they make decent power, the reason we don't see much of these is because these engines were pretty crap. A lawsuit was filed against Ford because of these cars' notorious water pump issues. For most engines, the water pump is on the outside of the engine. For these, it's inside the engine and driven by a chain, which means shops will charge extra to replace it. Sometimes it's like $2,000, or if you do it yourself, it will be a nightmare. Well, there you have it, 10 American cars with the shortest production runs. Again, if you have any other suggestions, feel free to let me know. It will probably be featured in part 2. I appreciate you all watching till the very end. Thank you. I will try my hardest to see you all next week. It's been very busy lately, but I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.